Good morning. There's someone I'd like you to meet in Papeete. He's lived in Tahiti his entire life, and for almost 5 decades, he's been creating the most beautiful jewellery in Tahitian pearls. This is Tavita. He's Tahitian for David. He's an artisan jeweller. He's got a boutique showroom that most visitors to Papeete miss, but you definitely shouldn't. Now, why do they miss a visit to Tavita? Well, for 2 reasons. First, they get wooed by the very polished, tourist-targeting, generic jewellery shops along the waterfront. And that's very easily done, because their jewellery is beautiful, but it's samey. Now, the second, and most people miss out on a trip to Tavita's bijouterie because it looks like this. Unlike the mega commercial ventures with their slick websites and their sparkly shop window displays to tempt the passing magpies, Bijouterie Tavita has no online store, no window display. In fact, there's no window at all. This humble green door, which looks more like the entrance to somebody's apartment, is actually the unassuming portal to a gallery of uniquely designed, handcrafted jewellery. A collaboration between traditional craftsman Tavita and tens of thousands of oysters, perhaps millions of oysters over the half-century of Tavita's career. And you either stumble upon it by accident or because someone shares the secret with you. And we will go in beyond the block green door, but not yet. Tavita's family comes from the Tuamotu group of islands, a chain of about 80 islands and atolls to the east of Tahiti. And the Tuamotu archipelago is the largest chain of atolls anywhere in the world, extending north to south, an area of something equivalent to Western Europe. Now, the atolls may be small individually, but at a combined landmass of 328 square miles, which is 850 square kilometers, they make quite an impact. Fakarava, one of our ports of call, is part of the Tuamotu group. Anyway, as is common with Pacific Islanders, Tavita's family spread out pretty far. Some went to the Cook Islands, others to New Zealand, some stayed in the Tuamotus, and Tavita made his way to Papeete, the capital of Tahiti. And Tavita isn't the only person in his family with an interest in pearls. His cousins are pearl farmers. So let's start this story at the very beginning, from the early efforts to harvest pearls through to the modern pearl farms of today. And then, with that knowledge and context, it'll be time to go window shopping. Well, sort of window shopping. Window shopping without a window. But I'll show you what's on the other side of that green door. In Polynesian culture, everything has a legend behind it. Nature truly is legendary in this part of the world. So let's immerse ourselves in ancient culture and recount the legend of Oro and the gift of the black pearl. Oro is the Tahitian god of war and fertility. An interesting combination, and records don't seem to conclude whether he was a rape and pillage sort of love and war god or the ancient Polynesian precursor to flower power's make love not war mentality. Either way, he enjoyed a rather diversified portfolio in the pantheon of Polynesian deities. And Oro, son of the creator god Taha'a and Hina Tuamotu, wanted to find himself a wife. Now, heaven was a little light on options at the time, so he created a magnificent rainbow that stretched down from the heavens, down to earth, a bridge, if you will, for Oro to arrive in style. Now, Oro's journey on earth led him to the red-ridged mountain of Bora, where he coincidentally bumped into a gorgeous princess, Va'ira'umati, the daughter of Taha'a, who was the first man. Well, Va'ira'umati was well known throughout her islands for her exceptional beauty and grace, which were qualities that Oro found most becoming. And it's fair to say that if they had met in the modern age, he would have enthusiastically swiped right. Declaring his wish to marry her, Oro bestowed upon her the first black pearls, a pearl now eternally associated with this region. The pearls, with their fabulous sheen and mesmerizing ability to reflect all the colors of the rainbow, were a symbol of the union and divine blessings that accompanied it. It's believed that these dark pearls carry the mana or spiritual power of Oro himself. And so the legend of Oro and the rainbow has come to have a profound impact on Tahitian culture, with these black pearls, a divine gift from a love-struck deity, becoming highly valued and used in various ceremonies and rituals. So, Oro brought a magical oyster down with him from the heavens for the princess Faira'umati, but I guess he must have had some spares, just in case things didn't go well on the first attempt at courtship. Well, it turns out he's a bit of a god, so he must have tossed the spares into the sea, and that's how it all started. Now, pearls have been fished in these waters and other pearling regions like the Persian Gulf, Asia, Western Australia for centuries, maybe millennia. There are examples of the Egyptians using mother of pearl as early as 4,200 BCE. The earliest example of pearls themselves being used decoratively by humans dates back to 420 BCE. It was found in the stone coffin of a Persian princess. And those pearls are now on display at the Louvre in Paris. Now, there's a legend about Cleopatra that in a bid to show off her enormous wealth to Mark Antony, her amour, she dissolved a pearl in vinegar and drank it. If you think a glass of Brut is overpriced, that glass of pearly vinegar would be worth today about $37 million. And it was probably disgusting. But it wasn't until the 17th century that industry really started to heat up around pearling, and that was thanks to the Renaissance in Europe. This wellspring of enlightenment that gave birth to the typified all-rounder, still to this day dubbed the Renaissance man, saw the scientific efforts to breathe underwater, and that was a game changer. Pearling has always been dangerous, but really it's more than that. Pearling is a deadly industry. Before diving suits, pearlers would train themselves to hold their breath for up to 3 minutes, tie a rock around their ankle, and sink themselves to the seabed where they would scour for oysters. But the divers here in Polynesia, and in particular those of the Tuamotu archipelago, didn't use stones at all. They relied purely on the strength of their arms to propel them to their seabed. Their arms, some hyperventilating, and a few sacred chants before the dive. And beyond the pearl itself, Tahitian princesses would wear mother of pearl as decoration for their ceremonial dress. Now, with the arrival of Europeans, pearl fishing intensified until it reached a peak in 1960 with 645 tons of pearls fished in these waters. Now, that dropped by 70% over the course of the next decade, but that doesn't mean to say that interest in Tahitian black pearls dwindled. Far from it. Demand has soared. Interest is as high as it's ever been. So fishing has handed over the industry to farming. And since 1985, the pearl farmers of French Polynesia have collectively exported over 100 million pearls every year. So let's get into how a pearl forms. What is a pearl? And who is this mother of pearl that we keep hearing of? Well, a pearl itself is actually the result of a mollusk's natural defense systems kicking into action when a foreign body gets inside its shell. Think of it like your body tackling an infection. If you get an infection, your immune system is triggered to put up a load of bodily defenses, including engulfing the pathogen with white blood cells. Your immune system also produces antibodies which specifically target the invading microbe. So in simple terms, our body's immune system detects, locates, restricts, and destroys an invading pathogen. Now, oysters can't destroy the invading foreign body, so they create a protective barrier between them and it. And that protective barrier is formed of aragonite, which is the naturally occurring crystal form of calcium carbonate. And because one layer of protection isn't enough to give the mollusk peace of mind, they keep loading up the layers of aragonite, cementing each layer to the previous one with a translucent film of a waterproof protein called conchiolin. Every growing layer of aragonite, followed by conchiolin, followed by aragonite, followed by conchiolin again and again, by another splash of conchiolin, steadily forms a gorgeous pearl. The aragonite gives the pearl its base color, and the conchiolin its pearliness, that luminescent transparency, that magical sheen. And mother of pearl? Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Mother of pearl is exactly the same, but without the foreign body in the center. So instead of forming a rounded gemstone, mother of pearl lines the inside of the mollusk's shell. But it's the same material, it's just more readily available and therefore considered to be less valuable. Okay, so now we've covered the history of pearling and worked out what a pearl actually is. We're going to come back to the farming and jewellery making parts. But first, let's take a little break from the water and let's tackle some of the country's history. How did a group of 121 islands and atolls in the South Pacific become French? And do they want to be French? Well, the islands of French Polynesia have been inhabited for about 2,000 years. A combination of volcanic islands and coral-based sandy atolls, the total landmass of French Polynesia is 3,521 square kilometers, which is 1,359 square miles. 75 of the 121 islands are inhabited, and about 279,000 people call these islands home. The vast majority of that population lives in Tahiti. About 69% of the total French Polynesian population lives there, which makes sense given that Papeete, the capital, is also on the island of Tahiti. French Polynesia is divided into 5 different island groups. The earliest to be lived on by ancient Polynesian navigators are the Marquesas Islands, and we're going to be visiting Nuku Hiva in the Marquesas. And these islands have a human history stretching back about 2,200 years. The Austral Islands and the Gambia Islands are to the south of those islands, the Tuamotu archipelago to the east of the country. That includes the atoll of Fakarava, which we'll be visiting. And the majority of our French Polynesian ports are in what's called the Society Islands, the Île de la Société, to the west of the island group. Now, for a long period of time, these islands were either completely independent or in small local associations. Bora was its own country, as was Tahiti. Tahiti was under the rule of the Pomer dynasty, and with the help of some mercenary mutineers from the infamous Bounty, the tribal chief Tu created this Pomer dynasty, creating the name according to records of Captain Bligh in memory of his daughter, who had died of tuberculosis. During her illness, she would cough a lot, like some of you. Especially at night. And in Tahitian, the word for night is po, and the word for cough is mare. So together, po mare. Anyway, King Pomare I was an impressive unifier, and he became the first person to unify Tahiti in 1788. But as with many things in this region, things started to change with the arrival of Western missionaries. Now, all missionaries have a similar end goal, but they don't all play by the same for the same team, and crudely speaking, there were 2 groups of missionaries that had an interest in helping the people of Polynesia see the light. Generally speaking, you had Protestants from the London Missionary Society. They arrived in 1797. And you had French Catholic missionaries who arrived about 30 years later in 1834. Well, the London Missionary Society had wasted no time at all, and aware of how powerful King Pomer I was, they concentrated their efforts at teaching him and his heir to become King Pomer II the gospel. The missionaries encouraged King Pomer II's political ambitions because it would be easier to work alongside one leader than many. And so Pomer II married the daughter of the chief of Raiatea and went to war against Chief Uturoa of the Hiva clan. And for the first time, all of the chieftains in the country vested in one person. And so he truly became king of Tahiti. And the country became an absolute monarchy. So when the king was baptized and converted to Protestantism, so too were all of his subjects. In a letter back home to the society dated May the 15th, 1823, the missionaries reported that they have totally changed the morals and customs of the inhabitants. Idolatry no longer exists among them, and they generally profess the Christian religion. That was 1823. But remember, the Catholic missionaries from France hadn't arrived yet. They arrived in 1834 and were apparently less welcome than Polynesian idols. Given that he and his subjects had converted to Protestantism, King Pomer II expelled the French missionaries in 1836. And that changed the island's history dramatically. 2 years later, the French returned, not with gospels, but with a gunboat. Within 4 years, France declared Tahiti to be a French protectorate, with the purpose of protecting the missionaries' ability to reconvert the population to Catholicism. Well, the French and the British battled for 3 years over Tahiti, and in the end concluded the war by signing the Jarnac Convention. And this 1847 declaration committed both sides to leaving the existing kingdom of Raiatea, Huahine, and Bora alone. Well, an Englishman's word is his bond. And the convention held for a few decades. But in 1888, the French reneged on the agreement and they colonized the lot. Some islands petitioned for British protection, but unsuccessfully, and the British didn't return to fight for these islands, and the protectorate became a colony known as Établissement Français de l'Océanie, French establishments in Oceania. Well, following the Second World War, most world powers started winding down their empires or colonies. But the French took a slightly different approach. Sure, they lost some former colonies like Algeria to independence, but with other colonies, they went for a rebrand. And that's what happened with les Établissements Français de l'Océanie. In 1946, the islanders were granted French citizenship, and the status of the islands were reassigned to an overseas territory. A year on, and the rebrand was completed with a new name, Polynésie Française, French Polynesia. It's been an up and down sort of ride. French Polynesians weren't asked if they wanted to be colonized. Then they weren't asked if they wanted to become French. And regional politics has been marred with pro- and anti-independence debate for decades, often at the detriment of other important policy discussions. And this is perhaps best illustrated by looking at the political leadership here in the noughties. In 2004, no party won an overall majority in the Assembly of French Polynesia. And thanks to the leanings of a couple of independent assembly members, the pro-independence leader, Oscar Temaru, assumed the presidency of the assembly. That was June 2004. By October 2004, Temaru was toppled and the presidency was granted to Gaston Floss, an old-timer anti-independence politician. That was October 2004. By March 2005, Floss was toppled and the presidency was handed over to none other than Temaru again. He survived a year this time, but by December 2006, Temaru was out again, this time replaced by another anti-independence Gaston, this time Gaston Tongsang. That was December 2006. By September 2007, Oscar Temaru was back with the presidency for a third time in 3 years. The question of independence or integration with France has plagued politics here. In 2013, the UN put French Polynesia back on its list of non-self-governing territories, which gives the people of French Polynesia access, should the will be there, to a UN-backed independence referendum. Now, that referendum hasn't happened, and it's not clear what the outcome would even be, but it's definitely a talking point. And that talking is to be done in French, s'il vous plaît. Because by French law, the only official language of French Polynesia is French. Though the 1996 statute does concede that Tahitian and other Polynesian languages are permitted to be used. As of the last census, taken in 2017, 74% of citizens speak French at home, with Tahitian being the second most common mother tongue, with about 20% of the population. Okay, let's get back to the pearls. And now we're in the modern era of pearl farming. The pearls are still natural, but they're not organic. Humans, farmers, are now increasing their odds of finding pearls. 3 years into a life, an oyster is mature enough for grafting. Before the operation, the oyster is deprived of food for a few days, which slows down their metabolism. By slowing the oyster's metabolism, farmers decrease the risk that the graft is rejected by the oyster. At the same time, nuclei of between 2 to 12 millimeters are cut from the shells of certain varieties of freshwater mussel, and the best kind is the Mississippi mussel. Now, once smoothed off to a perfect sphere, the nucleus is ready for grafting. So, we've got a starving oyster with a deliberately slowed metabolism, and we've got a perfectly smooth sphere of a shell from a freshwater mussel. Now's the time to cut a small piece of flesh from the oyster itself and insert this flesh along with the nucleus into the oyster's gonad. Including a small cut of its own flesh again helps reduce the chance of the oyster rejecting the nucleus. And finally, because this is a humane industry, the oyster is given a massage to help speed up the healing process. And in case you ever stumble upon an oyster in need of a massage, here are the top tips. First, it's all about the timing. You have to get to work right away, without delay. If you're good, you're going to get repeat bookings from the same oyster. We all know a repeat customer is the best customer. Second, be gentle. This isn't a deep tissue massage, this is a stress reliever. Keep it light, keep it soft. If you really want to get yourself a good reputation, get good reviews in the oyster salon circle, stick to nice circular motions around the graft site. Even incorporate some soft brushes to your technique, just for some extra stimulation. Believe it or not, a really good massage really helps make a really good pearl. And once you have your pearl, it's time to do something with it. And that brings us back to our little green door. Tavita makes all of his jewellery on the site, in his small workshop round the back of his shop. And using pearls from his family farm, he creates unique, handcrafted pieces mounted in gold or silver for men and women. But there's one piece in particular that stood out for me, so much so that I bought it for my mum. It's a bunch of grapes made of pearls. A beautiful cluster of pearls in a design that I just had never seen before. And so I asked Tavita where the idea had come from, and the answer was as beautiful as the jewellery itself. The original bunch of grapes was a gift for his wife, a love letter in the form of jewellery, combining the black pearls of Tavita's home with the rich red wine of France, where his wife grew up. And she must have heard us talking about it, because then she came over and she is still wearing that pendant decades later. So how do you choose a nice pearl? Well, here are Tavita's 5 things to keep an eye out for. The first is the color. Really, this one comes down to personal preference. Among Tahitian black pearls, the most sought-after hues are peacock green, blue, and eggplant. But if you see a color that you like, then that is the color for you, because color doesn't change the quality of a pearl. Size is a big factor when choosing a pearl. In terms of style, and of course in terms of price, the larger a pearl is, the rarer it is. So generally speaking, Tahitian black pearls range from 9 to 14 millimeter in diameter, but in rare cases, you can find a black pearl that can reach as much as 18 millimeters. The larger the pearl, the more layers of aragonite and conchyolin have built up. But with each new layer, there's a renewed risk of surface defects, like pitting. So Tavita's third thing to look out for is the purity of the surface. A single spot, that's easy to cover up. So if you're mounting your pearl or using it as a bead, you can just use that spot as the point that you're going to drill out. But if there are multiple imperfections, that's where the pearl starts to lose its charm. The way a pearl handles light, also known as its brilliance, that plays a bit of a role in the overall quality of the effect of an individual pearl. And this is measured in 2 ways. You've got the pearl's luster, which is considered that surface shine, and that's ranged from matte to high gloss, just like emulsion paints in your hardware store. And then there's orient, and that's the inner light. That's the light that gives that impression that pearls actually give the light. It's actually emanating from within them. And finally, shape. And again, this one comes down to personal preference. But generally speaking, round pearls are considered the most beautiful, and therefore they're the most expensive. And they're followed by pears or teardrops, then perfectly ovoid ovals, buttons, then semi-baroques, and then totally baroque pearls, which are completely irregular and non-symmetrical. And by the way, just because a pearl is irregular doesn't mean it's not a beautiful pearl. It absolutely can be. Baroque pearls are fascinating to examine with so many totally unique shapes and qualities, and they also make for an affordable string of pearls, or something a little quirkier. So, Tahiti's 5 things to keep in mind when shopping for pearls are color, size, purity of the surface, brilliance, and shape. But remember, there's one thing that trumps all else. Do you, or whoever you're buying it for, actually like it? Because if you love it, then it really doesn't matter what any expert says. There's one more story I want to share with you from inside Tahiti's bijouterie. But before we get to that, let's talk about our upcoming ports of call in French Polynesia. Given that we've got 1 day at sea before 6 ports, I'm going to give you a quick pick of highlights now, and then we're going to go into more detail, of course, one by one in our nightly Q&A sessions. So let's start with our first French Polynesian port of call, Uturoa. Now, Uturoa is the main town on the island of Raiatea, which is a beautiful green volcanic island. And Raiatea is home to one of the most significant cultural landmarks in the whole region, the UNESCO World Heritage listed Moorea Tuamotu, which was once the religious center of eastern Polynesia. Now, this Moorea is located on Opoa, which is on the southeastern coast of the island, and it once served as the gathering place of priests and navigators from across the Pacific, who then came here, they made sacrifices, and they shared knowledge. And the site is dedicated to the god Oro, that same god who brought the first black pearls down to earth from heaven when he pursued his love interest, that Tahitian princess Fakarava, on the island of Bora. Now, other ideas for Uturoa include going hiking up the mountain, taking a boat trip out to the nearby Taha'a, which is known for its vanilla plantations and beautiful coral gardens, or rent a kayak and paddle up the Fakarava River, which is the only navigable waterway across the entirety of French Polynesia. For pearls, consider a visit to Anapa Pearl Farm or Verua Pearl for the opportunity to learn more about pearl farming and, of course, to buy pearls directly from the farms themselves. Next, we head to Bora. Bora is the poster child of French Polynesia. It's the island that is often considered the most beautiful by international tourists, and it's easy to see why. In fact, the island's name, originally Pora Maitepora, translates as firstborn of the gods or created by the gods. And it's not difficult to see how it got that name. My top pick for Bora is to rent a car. Rent a car and drive the whole way around the island. It's not a long drive to complete, and the ring road means that it is impossible to get lost. You're going to see that central peak from all angles, and if you've rented your own car, then you'll be able to pull over pretty much anywhere you want. You see, oh, that looks like a good place to take a dip. You go take a dip in the sea. The best public beach, though, is Bora Beach, and you're going to find loads of taxis and private shuttle buses waiting near the tender pier, offering trips just 10 minutes up the road to get there. So we're in Bora until late into the night, and then we scoot across to Huahine, which is the start of the Hawaiki Nuava, which we're going to talk more about in our next talk. And there are more white sand beaches here to laze out on and just totally lose yourself to the pure bliss of the moment. But if you want something unique to this island, look for these rare blue-eyed eels. They emerge from the caves and they swim up into the streams. So if you head out to the village of Fakarava and look into the water from the bridge, you can even actually buy a can of mackerel from the store to feed the eels. It tempts them out, and you see them wriggling. They're disgusting. But really, check out their eyes. They are bright blue as the French Polynesian Sea. And you can't miss these eel either, because they slither up to 2 meters in length. Huahine is actually 2 islands. We tender into the smaller island, but the larger island is just over a short bridge. So there's a shuttle bus that takes you over from the pier to the main town at the northern point of the larger island. But please don't expect air conditioning on that bus. Actually, it would be best if you disregard most common features of a bus. Please forget about windows, forget about seats, for sure forget about seatbelts. You see, this bus is called Le Truck. And it's been a feature in French Polynesia for decades, which is frankly a miracle once you consider how bumpy the ride is. I'd guess that the suspension on this one gave out about 30 years ago. That was about the same time that the farmer donated it to the community to be used as a bus. So this is an open back wagon bus. It's got bench seating. So if you've got any back issues, it will put them right straight away. And if you don't have any back issues to put right, then you will by the time of the return journey. Now on to Moorea. This is certainly one of my favorite places in French Polynesia. It's one of the world's most idyllic honeymoon locations because it is simply so spectacular. It's impossible for love not to blossom here. There are more tourist hotels here in Moorea than in the capital city of Papeete on Tahiti. And it's worth being aware that most of the beaches are privately owned by the fancy resorts on the north and northwest coast. So if you want to head to a public beach, that's on the northeast coast in Taha'a. But my top pick for Moorea is actually the Tiki Village, which is a traditional Polynesian village that's been rebuilt as a tourist attraction with dancing, Polynesian handicrafts, and of course, a good chance to buy some local souvenirs. And then after Moorea, we're treated to an overnight stay in Papeete, the capital city on the island of Tahiti. Of course, you could head out to see the surfers, tackle chupu, or you could embrace the culture here and take in maybe one of the days as a museum day. My top picks for that are the Paul Gauguin Museum, celebrating the famous French artist's life and work, because Gauguin lived in Tahiti for many, many years, painted many of his most famous compositions on and of the island and its islanders. And also, the Robert Wan Pearl Museum is a good one to go to, free museum to visit. Situated next to Pa'afal Gardens, that's the Musée de la Pearl Robert Wan in French. It is the only dedicated pearl museum in the world. And as you now know, as if you didn't know already, Tahitian pearls are really quite something. And then it's back to the beach when we get to Fakarava. Undoubtedly, this is one of the most peaceful and gorgeous ports on our entire itinerary. There's a small village, and then there's the bluest sea you'll ever see. The atoll has been listed as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve thanks to the incredible array of rare flora and fauna. And if you are a diver, then you can make friends with over 500 sharks. There's a lot of beauty waiting for us this week in French Polynesia. And it's one of those places that always reminds me how fortunate I am, how lucky to be able to see all these wonderful places, to have the good health to get out there into the world and experience so much of it firsthand. For me, these are lucky islands, that the people who live here have a spirit of positivity and determination that shines through their cultural customs as well as, of course, in their natural splendor. These are islands where people have made their own luck, often through extreme conditions. I mean, just think about those early generations of pearl divers. But also, for some reason, these islands that just make me feel lucky, like I've won the lottery without even entering. And so I'm going to leave you with this little anecdote in case you do visit Tavita's hidden bijouterie. Tavita has a photo album of his favorite pieces from over the years and a few from friends who are also jewelers. And that got us talking about the display cabinet that's tucked right into the back corner of the shop. I bet a lot of people miss it. And I complimented Tavita on this coral carving that was in this display cabinet, decorated with pearls. And he told me that it was something that he'd made in collaboration with a friend. And then, with a sort of smile that makes you lean in because you know you've got to catch this story, he told me that there was actually a second one, an arching dolphin made out of coral with pearls decorating the scene. And Tavita had a friend who he really admired, that dolphin statue, and this friend was going through a really hard time and really struggling at that moment. So Papeete gave the dolphin to his friend as a gift to pick him up. Well, 6 months later, that friend won $1.5 million in the lottery. When I say French Polynesia makes me feel lucky, I'm still waiting for that kind of luck. Thanks for coming.